Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 5th Planning Commission meeting. First thing we'll do is stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Sure. Holdcamp. LaRue. Here. Moody.
Here.
Odine.
Here.
Prendergast. Woolsey.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have approval of the minutes from the June 7th meeting.
I move approval.
Second.
First and second, questions or comments?
I have a question for Emily, and we discussed this. On page number 2, the minutes indicate that the picnic shelter of Sterling Ponds Park, the picnic shelter will be installed in the next year or two. And then on the second page, it indicates the picnic shelter is not in the budget until approximately 2027. Can you clarify the record when those folks can expect to have a picnic shelter out there?
Thank you, Commissioner LaRue. I will look that up in our capital improvement
Okay,
plan
thank you.
and figure out the timing of the improvements for you.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, before I move on to public comments, I wrote a couple things down just to kind of get us all up to the same speed. I'm assuming most people are here for park on dedication stuff. So, before I open up the public comment, I just want to take this opportunity to say a few words and provide some clarity for those that may need it. It has come to my attention that there has been increased engagement amongst neighbors in Sterling Ponds over the future of the remaining undeveloped land in the development. This includes discussion and consideration related to the undedication of 3 acres of parkland in the Sterling Ponds neighborhood for a potential project. As a follow-up to the approved 2020 Sterling Ponds Park Plan, staff forwarded the potential of an undedication of the undeveloped land of the undeveloped parkland to City Council, who then requested it be forwarded to the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission, us up here, then voted against recommending undedication to City Council at our last meeting on June 7th. There are no further pending actions on this undedication action being considered by this Plan Commission or the City Council. The site will remain as it is. The city is currently updating its comprehensive plan, bicycle and recreation and pedestrian plan, and outdoor recreation plan. This process, known as Focus River Falls, provides opportunities to plan future parks and open spaces for recreation. This process also provides community members with many opportunities to share their own input and feedback about what they would like to be considered when making plans. If you haven't already, please take the time to sign up to learn more about this process at engagerf.com. The resulting plans guide decision-making by staff and offer a roadmap for elected officials moving forward. Thank you, and with that, I will open up the public comments. So, we'll open up the public comments. If anybody has anything they'd like to say, please come forward, write your name and your address, and we'll move on.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Marnie Poquette, and I live at 3215 Sussex Street in Sterling Ponds. And I just wanted to thank this committee for voting down the undedication of the park in Sterling Ponds. So thank you for listening, and thank you for hearing our concerns.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name's Therese Stacy. I also live on Sussex Street, 3248 Sussex Street,
And again, also want to thank members for voting against the undedication. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else have anything?
Hi, my name's Joelle Cooley. I live in Sterling Ponds. And I want to especially thank Patricia for all of your advocacy during the last meeting for the residents of Sterling Ponds. I think we all appreciate all of your efforts for us. But I do have just a couple questions in regards to Sterling Ponds. So it's been voted down currently. What does that mean for?
There's no plan. There's no plans to talk about it anymore.
So
Right now.
It's a done deal.
As of right now, yep. That doesn't mean in 5 years it won't come back. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but as of right now, there's no plan to put it on the planning commission. There's no plan to bring it in front of the council.
For undedication.
Yep. Yep. It'll just remain as it is.
And then if that changes, how would the residents be notified again? Is it just through?
Following the city pages, following the website, we post everything online. Yeah.
But no plans to like reach out to the residents in the neighborhood. It would just all be online.
Oh, we might. You know, how long down the road? I don't know how long it'd be. What we're planning on doing, it all kind of depend on that.
Okay.
I mean, we would obviously want you guys, you know, as informed as possible. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Okay. We'll move on to ordinances and resolutions, and Emily Shivey is going to give us a presentation on this.
Emily, while you're getting that ready, it's engagerf.org.
What did I say, .com?
.com.
Sorry, so sorry. It's .org. I should have worn my hat.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Emily Shively, River Falls City Planner. And this evening, we're discussing several amendments to the zoning ordinance and city code related to parking, nuisances, rental uses, signage, and code enforcement. As conditions change, it's beneficial to update the zoning ordinance and city codes to ensure that community goals continue to be met as new issues arise. In response to issues identified in a report to Council in June 2021, there we go. The City Council directed staff to proceed with enhancing a proactive code enforcement program over the next 2 years that includes more tools and resources to address emerging issues. So staff has been working over the past year with Larry Kirch of Prologue Planning to evaluate existing city codes and identify best practices from other communities to determine appropriate ordinance changes. Staff has also been operationalizing a new code enforcement manual to ensure that consistent processes and procedures are used to obtain code compliance. So this evening, we're discussing several proposed amendments to the zoning code and the city code to address 5 primary areas identified here. Parking, public nuisances, and enforcement procedures were identified and directed by Council in the 2021 Council report. Changes to rental housing regulations are recommended by staff in response to the state of Wisconsin reducing the city's authority regarding rental licensing and inspection programs. And this is one step that will assist in ensuring the health and safety of the city's rental housing. And then finally, changes to the sign code have been added in response to issues related to the placement of signage in the right-of-way. The proposed amendments are a response to current and emerging issues that staff and community members have identified and the City Council has prioritized. The intent of the modifications is to provide clearer standards in these areas so that it's easier for everyone to understand the expectations and requirements to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So I will now discuss each of those 5 in a little bit more detail. First, parking. So it's been determined that our current ordinance does not adequately address a number of issues related to parking on residential properties. And this has resulted in resident complaints and conflicts with utility location and stormwater management. For example, there's no setback requirement stating how close to the property line you can pave a driveway or park or store a vehicle. This means that a resident could pave and or park up to the property line, which does not leave adequate room for utilities, stormwater, or snow storage, and may create encroachment issues with adjacent properties. There's also a need to specify that vehicles are to be parked on an improved surface, asphalt, concrete, brick, or other dust-free surface, and not on grass or other landscaped areas. When vehicles are not parked on an appropriate surface, yards may become rutted, and erosion may occur, which negatively impacts the quality of our surface waters. The parking location and surfacing requirements also need to apply to parking and storage of recreational vehicles, boats, equipment trailers, etc. The proposed ordinance amendment would require that parking and driveways be located at least 5 feet from the property line, and then not within a drainage and utility easement. So sometimes easements along the property line are greater than 5 feet to accommodate specific utility and drainage requirements in an area. So some properties may have a greater setback for parking and driveways to keep those areas clear. And that's important to allow for installation and maintenance of utilities and for free-flowing drainage ways. A minimum setback of 5 feet also ensures that there's an area of separation between driveways and parking on adjacent properties to address potential encroachments or impact on a neighboring parcel. And then just some details that we're cleaning up. The proposed amendment also removes a clause that's unrelated to other pieces in that section, and then consolidates parking standards into one section of the code rather than in 2 places right now, which makes it more challenging to implement. All right, next, nuisances. So this is one of the primary areas of city code where a lack of specificity has created challenges in communicating community expectations and addressing resident property maintenance complaints. The existing code is broad, and while it enumerates various conditions affecting health and safety, it fails to address some of the most common concerns related to inoperable vehicles and exterior storage of household items. The proposed code amendments would address maintenance of exterior property and premises with specific examples of what's considered inappropriate and hazardous to store openly in a yard, such as appliances, household garbage, televisions, etc. The amendment also prohibits improper disposal or dumping of trash or moving it simply from one property to the other. The parking standards that I just discussed previously are intended to address the parking and storage of vehicles in good working condition. However, one of the complaints staff receives are about inoperable vehicles, which may not have current license tabs or missing key components or have flat tires. If a property owner has a car they're working on, they can have it on their property as long as it's stored in a garage or a shed or screened with an opaque wall or fence and out of public view. So the ordinance is intended to prohibit a proliferation of inoperable vehicles from taking up required parking spaces or becoming increasingly deteriorated and creating unsafe and unsightly conditions. All right, and now on to another one of the 5 issues, rental uses. So as I mentioned earlier, recent state law changes have impacted how cities are able to regulate and inspect rental properties. In the past, the city had an annual rental licensing program that allowed the building inspector to identify potential health and safety issues on a regular basis to ensure adequate maintenance and upkeep of rental properties. However, current law only allows cities to have a required inspection program in areas that are designated as blighted. Since the law changed, only a couple of cities in the state have designated blighted areas, and so our staff continue to monitor the effects of the law in River Falls and other cities. So even though we can't do that annual inspection program, it's still important to ensure basic habitability standards are met in all residential properties in the city. So the amendment adopts the habitability violations enumerated in state statute. State law does allow the city to institute a residential rental registration program. And the city already has that program in place, but this ordinance amendment ensures that the regulations are compliant with state law. So one of the things state law specifically addresses is the maximum registration fee that can be charged per building, which is $10. And the code amendment also incorporates the statutory definition of a habitability violation and outlines the complaint and enforcement procedures, as well as violations and penalties that the city is allowed to put in place under the law. So the code amendment also adopts state statutes and codes related to the construction of buildings and licensure of contractors so that it's clear that these regulations apply to projects and work within the city. The proposed zoning ordinance amendment also defines residential rental uses and allows them as a permitted use in all zoning districts that allow residential housing. Rental properties are currently allowed in all residential districts. However, the current code does not distinguish between owner-occupied and rental housing units. The proposed ordinance amendment would also add language to the zoning ordinance that has been in the building and construction section of city code since the 1970s. And this language specifies the minimum space needs for bedrooms and living areas. The intent of these provisions is to prohibit landlords from designating a closet, attic, or garage space as a bedroom unless those spaces meet the minimum building code standards for light, ventilation, and egress, as well as minimum floor and ceiling height requirements. The standards also regulate the maximum occupancy of a dwelling unit to make sure that all inhabitants have sufficient living space and avoid overcrowding. All right, number 4, the next area is signage. In a recent Supreme Court case, the court determined that signage can be regulated with regard to location, manner, and duration, but not on the content or message of the sign. So this means that all signs must be regulated in the same way, and you can't differentiate between signs based on what the sign says. The issue this has created in River Falls relates to signs in the right-of-way. Currently, the ordinance allows temporary garage sale signs and real estate directional signs to be located within the right-of-way. The intent was to allow those signs for a limited period of time, after which they would be removed. However, since the city is not allowed to differentiate between garage sale signs, real estate signs, and any other signage, including commercial and political signs, all signs must now be allowed in the right-of-way. So this has led to problems with signs being placed in unsafe or inappropriate locations. The proposed ordinance amendment would remove the provisions that allow garage sale and real estate signs in the right-of-way. With that change, no signs would be permitted within the right-of-way except for required traffic signs and those that are adjacent to businesses in the downtown overlay district. So that's just a special area where we allow sandwich boards out on the sidewalk near the business. So all garage sale, real estate, commercial advertising, and political signs would then be required to be located on private property. Someone wanting to place a sign on property other than what they own, for example, a garage sale sign on the corner, directing someone to a sale down the block, they would need to get permission from that corner property owner to place a sign on that parcel. Since it's also not easy to know exactly where the right-of-way line is, the ordinance requires that any sign be placed at least 15 feet from the curb. And that's a standard that's already in the code for all political signs. And then the proposed ordinance also clarifies language related to flashing and moving signs. This is a super technical change, just adding the word signs after flashing and moving, because some of those signs are prohibited in some locations. And then duration regulations for political signs have been removed to comply with state law. All right, the last piece addresses enforcement. So while it's essential that ordinances clearly state regulations that are to be followed to achieve policy goals and ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the community, a necessary component of any ordinance are procedures for ensuring compliance with those regulations. So we have a code enforcement manual that I referenced that clearly lays out the administrative procedures for staff to follow when identifying a code violation and working with the property owner to achieve compliance. The basis for the administrative procedures must be outlined in city code and the zoning ordinance in order to clearly communicate the process and expectations to property owners and to provide appropriate authorization for staff to carry out enforcement proceedings. The proposed zoning ordinance and city code amendments replace our current violation enforcement ordinances to add more specificity and detail and provide consistency amongst all code enforcement procedures. The code enforcement process articulated in the proposed ordinance amendments is similar to our existing process, but provides more clarity and certainty for current and future staff as well as property owners and residents who are working to bring their property into compliance. Staff have already begun utilizing the city's e-newsletter and Facebook posts to remind residents and property owners of the need for permits and opportunities to dispose of unwanted items like the citywide cleanup and electronics recycling and those sorts of things. Further, staff seeks to educate property owners when receiving complaints and when following up with properties that are not in compliance with city codes and ordinances. Staff works to help owners and residents understand the why behind the ordinances and provide assistance when appropriate in locating resources to gain compliance, such as trash removal services, low-cost or volunteer maintenance programs, that sort of thing. The communication and outreach efforts are ongoing and will be particularly tailored when specific issues arise as common occurrences and present opportunities for education. A strong customer service approach has always been important for staff as they work to educate property owners about what may be needed and the rationale for the standards in the ordinance, with the goal of ensuring that our neighborhoods are safe, healthy, and well-maintained. The Code Enforcement Manual and the proposed ordinance amendments lay out a step-by-step process to follow to prevent, intervene, and resolve code violations. If a property achieves compliance at any time during the process, the case is closed and no further action needs to be taken. In conclusion, the proposed zoning ordinance text amendments and city code amendments respond to issues identified by staff and the community and prioritized by the City Council related to vehicle parking and storage on residential properties, maintaining safe and healthy residential rental properties, ensuring appropriate placement and regulation of temporary signs, and outlining clear standards for addressing code violations to protect health and safety. All of the proposed ordinances have been reviewed by the city attorney. So staff is recommending that the Plan Commission forward the proposed ordinance amendments to council with a favorable recommendation. And I will now turn it back to you, Mayor.
Are you guys okay with one vote on all of it? Or do you want each one broke up into an individual thing? I mean, you can ask questions on anything you want, obviously. Okay, so I'll take a motion on the zoning ordinance text amendments and city code amendments.
I will move approval of the zoning ordinance text amendments and city code amendments.
Second.
Second, questions?
I have,
I figure a few of us have to.
Go ahead.
yeah. Who's first?
Go ahead.
Mayor? Okay. Okay, yeah, that wouldn't be fair. So I'm having a, okay, it's on the parking standards. It's the third page of the parking standards. It's under F4, and it's talking about RVs being parked in people's driveways. And it's a minor thing, but it says in there that the RV shall not be unlawful, it shall be unlawful to back a vehicle into a parking space. Now, I used to do personal injury work, and 25% of car accidents are when people are backing out of a driveway. I personally always back into my driveway. I have an RV, and when you're driving down the street and you're going to turn around and back into your driveway, you have a full view of what's going on in the neighborhood. If you pull in and then you get up in the morning and you leave, you don't have that full view. So it's safer. I'm not saying you can't have someone walk around and all that, but it's safer to back cars into a driveway. And I would request that one, it shall be unlawful to back a vehicle into any parking space, be removed, because the purpose is so that a police officer can make sure the tags are good. And if you're talking about a child being run over by an RV or an officer getting out of his car and checking to see if the tabs are good, I would take the officer getting out of the car.
I think one of the challenges with that is an officer getting out of the car and going onto private property to view the rear license plate. There has to be sort of a reason that they're needing to do that. So to have something that's readily visible from the street or the alley is really what the intent there.
Yeah, I have a question. Don't RVs have a front license plate too?
I'm not sure if they're all required to or not.
Oh, yeah, I suppose if it's a
It would depend. If it was
behind.
like a fifth wheel, it wouldn't have a front plate. It could be backed in. I have a question that, I guess with that. So if someone came to visit and was going to be here a week or 10 days with their RV to stay at families and park in the driveway, is no longer acceptable then?
I think the idea is that 72 hours is appropriate, and then it needs to be moved. So we're really trying to prevent the long-term parking and storage of RVs in locations that aren't
So if
appropriate.
so the answer is yes, then if someone was coming to spend a week with family in their RV at their home, and that would
Although, if I may, under the enforcement guidelines, there would be a long period before you'd even get a citation. So I imagine that would extend it.
Okay.
Quick question on the clause in part 4 of that, where it states such equipment or recreational vehicle may be stored in an interior side or rear yard behind a double gate. Can you clarify on that and what the expectation is on that? I've looked a little bit into that with other city ordinances in the community. I'm not seeing that kind of requirement.
I think this goes to the idea of screening. And so if you're able to park in their side or rear yard, we still don't want it to be very visible from the street. So, and typically the best way to access those rear and side yard areas are from a double gate versus a single gate. So I think that's where that standard came from. And again, the planning consultant that we worked on looked at a number of codes and ordinances for best practices.
I think that would be an additional difficulty for a lot of people who own these vehicles. So are we, point of order, are we going to can we have amendments to this? So I would move to strike the clause behind a double gate in section 4. Yeah.
If I may, would you be okay with just striking the word double?
I guess the double gate is defined as that's part of the whole. We're assuming that there is a screen and a gate, but I'm saying, you know, having to fence your vehicle in or your RV. When I go around town and I see a lot of vehicles, that's going to be a lot of fences that are going to be ordered. I don't know that we need that screening, that kind of screening. If I'm looking at a pop-up camper, that's what we're talking about is an example. Putting that in the backyard next to the house, I'm required to have a fence or a screen around that. And we're only mentioning the gate, but we're not saying how high the fence should be and any of that. So I think either this is incomplete, and if we do go that far, I do think that there's going to be quite an expense for some folks, including me. I have a 6-foot trailer that I use for hauling kayaks and hauling debris to city compost. And I'm thinking, am I required with that kind of trailer, would I be required to shield it from view?
Okay.
So I'm looking at that part of it.
Then I second your amendment.
Okay.
Are we going to, should we do it as we go along?
Do you want, so, Scott, question for you.
Wake up.
Before we get too far down this rabbit hole, we're gonna make an amendment. Is it easier to vote on that amendment first before we get to something else and somebody makes another amendment on something else? Or are we better off, if somebody's gonna make an amendment to one of the sections, to take that section, set it aside, and vote on it separately?
You may be advised to see if there's general agreement with the concepts first. Yep. Meaning you don't have to agree that RVs or trailers should be screened at all or put away, or, you know, so status quo is pretty laissez-faire.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have a motor home and you mostly get it on the pavement and mostly get it next to your house, it's fine. You're not going to get a code visit for it. So I guess the first thing is it may be easiest for you each to follow each other is you've got parking nuisances, rental uses, and signage. You can figure out that there's one or two of these that you don't really have any amendments for, then you might want to set that kind of, and then move on to the ones that you think you're least agreeing on. But it's also,
But I think
it's also well in order to just make an amendment. Whoever's first makes the amendment. If you get a second, you amend it, and then Angie and I and Emily are going to do our best to keep track of where we're at, and then we can restate before you pass it. Okay, it's what you had in the packet, less this, plus this.
Yep.
That's what you're going
I
for.
think, and that's, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at like this is a nested amendment within the larger amendment, and it's just a strike through on that line.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could, our building inspector, Dave Hubble, is here, and just before you make the amendment, he may have some more information for you to think about before you make that change.
Yeah, Dave Oval. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the fencing part is a lot of people, you say, yeah, it's your little pop-up camper, it's an RV or whatever, but to some people, as I always say, that looks like toxic waste to some people because their yard is immaculate and your camper looks terrible. And I think that's the intent and always has been in the ordinance. You need to screen it from public view and the tarp doesn't count. I think the double gate's supposed to be, they mean you're supposed to fence it in at least. But that's the only, the intent of that ordinance is, yeah, otherwise, that parked car might, well, I've got an old antique car. That looks great, doesn't it? Well, are they mowing around it? So I think the intent is to screen it. So I don't have to look at your camper, RV, or whatever in your backyard. Some people, again, I've got enough complaints. That looks like, you know what, so.
And I agree with that to an extent. I'm looking at the somewhat of the cost to people who will get the, who for years might have had their vehicle and in good faith have shielded it close to their house and they think it's out of view. And then there's this added expense. So when I look at this, that's, and Emily and I have kind of talked about this, is maybe a long, good enough lead time for people to know this is coming and that to be compliant, there might be costs incurred and you've got months to maybe figure it out or get rid of the vehicle or whatever.
And maybe it's not a fence all the way around the yard. It's just enough to park it behind that. Maybe
Sure.
that's the intent too. So it's not, you got to fence your whole backyard, but just enough to screen that from public view. So just a thought.
And to state,
Yeah.
to state maybe the obvious, there is not uniform agreement among staff as to what the best path forward is. In fact, there's quite disagreement about what the pros and cons and the benefit of restricting people's property rights are versus their neighbors. So when we say it's recommended by staff, this is the package that we feel we've heard from Plan Commission, Park Board, City Council, citizen complaints that closely reflects where the community is at as a whole. But we need your help to say, nope, that's too much, not enough. Because there's quite a gamut of approaches with this, right? We've had more of a hands-off approach, which has allowed people to have different approaches to their personal property on their real property. So you can have 4 trailers and a camper and a boat and snowmobile and 3 teenagers, and that's a lifestyle that's supported right now in River Falls. At some con to the neighbors, or at least a perceived con to the neighbors who feel like that's that's too intense of a use. So that's the policy decision for you all.
And I think that one of the issues for me is, trying to look at this, in a kind of even-handed way, of course. You want to be somewhat neutral, but then you have your own things. So, for example, I do see things that are in driveways that I just wish it was on the side of their yard, their backyard, and I'm fine with that then. But, then it's what Dave is saying too is, well, there's people that live behind that person and then they see that out the window. So, so that's kind of where I'm going. But I'm going back to that, the cost to, accommodate something that they hadn't before. And I don't know what those costs would be. For some people, it might be, past the ability to maintain the the vehicle that they had and that kind of thing. And,
Or a proliferation of mini warehouses and storage yards, right? I mean,
right, yeah,
everything as,
right.
if you squeeze the balloon,
Yeah.
the chances of everybody just getting rid of all their fun stuff
Right.
is not likely.
Sure.
Many cities don't allow this at all. And so in their mind, it's neat and orderly, and the boats are all in the boat yard, and the RVs are all
Right.
RV, and the project car is in the mini storage. And then there's cities that tend to be more, I'd say we're on the more liberal approach to private property use, where it is entirely dependent on your neighbor. Because some neighborhoods, there isn't much of any of this, and some neighborhoods, it's like everybody's got a pop-up camper and they're all fine with it, and other neighborhoods, so we're not gonna find probably a solution that makes everybody, or even, it's hard even to find a solution that makes most people happy. Again, when staff asked me if I was ready to let this kind of go forward, my answer was, yeah, I think I'm behind where the community is. Community is ready for a more proactive approach. I'm not that excited about it. I think there's some cautions, but I'm realizing shouldn't be the gatekeeper. It's really a policy decision for the community to say how much tolerance we want to have of each other and their stuff.
Or the double gatekeeper. No,
The double gatekeeper. Well, my question on the signs is, does this mean it'll be illegal to put a sign on 2nd Street that says, "This is my spot for the parade"? So no more signs on 2nd Street. So
The other thing I'd state, if you want, I'd be more than happy to let anybody be code enforcement officer for 6 months, and then you can tell me how you want to do it.
And I think at the end of the day, the idea is to be clear as to what the standard is, and then we want to enforce it consistently.
How about this? I'm going to withdraw my amendment if you agree. Okay. And I'm going to let the council look at this, and but this is a concern that I'm bringing up, and maybe they can look at that. And
just to clarify with you, are you not a fan of having to have a double gate, or just the whole gate altogether, any kind of enclosure altogether?
I think it's maybe the enclosure altogether. So, and I think again, it's just coming forward to someone and saying you might have to spend anywhere from some hundreds of dollars, but as city administrator had mentioned, it's they might opt to then move that to storage or something else. But it's just, I feel that there's going to be some resistance to this. But then, yeah, right. So.
And with changes like this, it may take some time to adjust, and we can always come back if once we're experiencing some things out in the field, once these things are in place, say, you know what, this is what we're seeing. We think there should be some adjustments, and then have that policy discussion again, in terms of what we should be doing and the direction we should go.
And finally, I have one thing too is related that crossed my mind while we were speaking, and Dave has experienced it out there, is people complaining about what they're seeing from their backyard or neighbor's yard or whatever. If there's a way to get that feedback from the people who are in favor of this, if there was some way that when the city is met with resistance, you can point to saying, no, there's a lot of residents want this. And usually we hear the squeaky wheel or the person who's pushing back, and they might have a good reason personally, but we want to communicate to the community that the community is behind this. So.
Yeah, and I think, your point about required expense is valid, but that is also part of what you take on when you have a property in a community. Like, you may have to replace the roof, you may have to paint your house occasionally. And so thinking about, okay, if I want to have, these various different items, I may need to think not only about if my property even physically can store it, or I have to have an offsite storage facility, or that, okay, well, I can pretty much do whatever I want in my backyard as long as I got a fence, and it's just sort of shielded. And then, so I'm willing to put the fence up, and then I'll have some more freedom to do what I want back there, that kind of thing.
Question, signs. I'm thinking of the garage sale signs that go up on whatever day. Who's gonna enforce that and how are you gonna do it? I mean, is Dave gonna run around and just, start plucking signs and moving them nicely for people, or?
So I think what we do first is start by getting the word out, because this will be a change. And so letting people know, yep, you can have a sign, but you have to talk to your neighbor if you're wanting to put it, on the corner or something like that. And then we will, after that period of education, and we're going to try to use whatever avenues and venues we have to present that information, give people examples, talk about the 15 feet back, that sort of thing. There will be a point in time where we do want to start enforcing this. I think what we do is we utilize the resources we have to do the enforcement that we can. We do have a staff member who can come on weekends and be checking lots of different issues, and because sometimes people will do things on weekends and that's when we get complaints, and then we come back in the week and then something's different and then it happens again on the weekend. So again, deploying our resources as needed in that way. But what this will also do is let us address our main thoroughfares and prioritize those and have uniform enforcement there. So if we have particular visible corners that have a proliferation of lawn mowing services and snow plowing and I buy houses and we can go out and just take those signs. So
I'm thinking of the corner of Lawson and Cascade, and that's always, it's a tough corner. 15 feet, I think there's asphalt, but I'm wondering, are you going to find people that put garage sale signs up every year? I'm just curious.
So I think the idea is that we let people know where they can go and then try to encourage them to do that, and then prioritize places that are unsafe or really inappropriate and for removal.
Thank you.
Well, at least you'll know the address to go to tell the person, get the signs up.
So I don't know if either Angie or Dave have anything else, because they do a lot of our enforcement of signs right now. If they have anything else they'd like to share about that?
Right now, we basically we will go out and pull them. But again, with the political ones, and you can't do that now. So everything can sit there. So it's either one or none or all. So yeah, we'd just probably go out and pull them. I don't think we'd cite people for it. It's just a matter of pulling them out. They have to come and get them and try to educate them that way too.
So can political signs stay out there they don't have to come down after the election?
Right now, that is correct.
Okay.
But at least we'll keep them off the public right away, private property.
So your question about, I think there was a question about how do we know? I mean, the last citizen survey, so this is our random sample statistically significant survey that we track. We've done 4 times over 8 years, and we tracked. It looks like the code enforcement section's slipping a little bit, and we've seen that, only 10%, which is low for us. Only 10% of our residents rate code enforcement as excellent. Now, we're assuming that means they want more code enforcement. It could also mean that we have too much. I don't think that's probably the case. I think if they're answering that it's poor, they probably feel we're not getting the couch off the yard, or the neighbor's got a car in the grass. I think that would be the smart way to make an assumption about the results. But so we had 10% excellent, 38% good, 36% fair, and 16% poor. And so, to give you an example, kind of comparison, garbage collection, 31% excellent, 55% good, 12% fair, and only 2% poor. So code enforcement overall has been rated lower in these surveys. I was going to see if there was another, I don't have a quick comparison page, but my recollection is that our scores for code enforcement are not going up. Okay. And then we saw that change. I think the law change for rental properties changed just about the first time we did our citizen survey, our first citizen survey, where the state kind of tied our hands and said, you can't really inspect, you can't proactively do residential rental, you have to do your code enforcement across the community, all properties. And that's the same thing we're running into with this Supreme Court case, which seems like a reasonable case law conclusion by them. They're just saying Constitution's so strong that you can't decide the type of speech that you're regulating. So even though we may all agree garage sale signs are not what we're concerned about, the person who's running for elected office can say, well, you let the garage sale sign in, so therefore I can put my sign wherever I want. So you have to decide if you're willing to put up with signs everywhere, all types in the right of way or not, unless we can come up with some different approach, which I haven't seen cities finding different approaches. We're also not winking and nodding at you. So we're not saying approve this broad-based approach to signs and we're going to just leave certain categories of signs alone because we know you're okay with it. We all have a responsibility to follow the law and the Constitution, so we can't do that. We will have different effort based on priorities. I mean, we can't possibly cover the whole city every day. It makes no sense to spend that kind of money in my mind doing that. So like we mentioned, the corners where we have vision problems and we've got kids walking and crosswalks, we'll put the emphasis on the places that can have the biggest bang for the buck as far as results. Plus, some of the communities that do this, they've just seen a general decline in signs, right? And because after a while, if you just keep putting signs out and they get removed, it just becomes a place where they know it's not worth their money to put the 1-800 mattress or whatever stuff out on the terrace. And maybe the corner lot people can start making some money. we might have an ordinance against that, right? Would that be a billboard then? If you
Right.
you only let the neighbors you like put a sign in your yard. This would be new territory if you decide to have us enter it.
I just had, do we have a definition and this is under the rental part, and it's H, rental property or rental unit, is infested with rodents or insects. Is there a definition of infestation? Because you can have a tenant that has an ant problem, but is it, I'm just curious how that's enforced or how that's determined. And there's Dave.
Dave is the one who actually has seen.
I probably had a few, and I just call up landlord. Usually they're pretty good about, hey, your tenants are saying they had ant problems or bee problems, and most landlords will jump on that.
Okay, so
sometimes they need a prod,
okay,
but it's a matter of once I call, they usually are pretty good about following up.
Okay. So
I'm really mean.
All right.
So question, I guess, to follow that up. So if you call them and have to prod them and there's still an issue, is there ever a point where you can go in there?
I actually do. No, even with the state statute, it's the habitability, the tenant habitability issues. If a tenant says, you want to come out, I will go out and look at it. And though it's kind of a fine line, I say I'll use it under my nuisance ordinance if I have to, and I will cite you for that. It's not the rental, then it's more of a nuisance. It's health and safety. I would probably could issue a citation or threaten that part, just saying, hey, you got to take this care of. And again, most of them will do that. So,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got another question under the nuisance section. It's on page 4. It's 8.32.056, and it's about the notices and the courtesy notices. It does a very good job of walking through. The person will get a courtesy notice and then notice of violation, then the citation and officer discretion. I don't see anywhere in here where the person being cited has the right to say, wait a minute, you don't understand what you're seeing, or this isn't fair, or is there some kind of mechanism where they can challenge early on, an officer says this or Dave says this and go, no, that's not what it is.
So one of the things that's helpful is we have a number of staff who do code enforcement. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is have uniform, like everybody's seeing the same thing sort of idea. So if someone has kids' toys in the yard, for example, and the neighbor thinks that's a nuisance. And the code enforcement officer comes out and goes, well, what's really the health, safety, welfare violation here? And then maybe has a conversation with the person and says, could you think about this as your outdoor living room and maybe tidy up every once in a while? And could you put the kids' toys kind of over in this area and have those kinds of conversations? However, if a code enforcement officer sees a violation in code, we can check with each other too, to be like, do you agree that this is a violation of the code? If we get to the point where they don't agree and we've issued a citation, they can plead not guilty in municipal court, and then the prosecutor will review the case.
Okay, because I'm thinking about no mow May, where people are not mowing their lawns in May, but they have a reason they're not mowing their lawns in May. It's not because they're lazy. But if I got a violation, I would want to, well, now wait. Okay, thank you.
Yep, and I think usually if there's a violation, and one of the things is letting people know there's a standard you may not be aware of, and here's what it is, and here's why it is. But if there's, particularly a particularly challenging property that we're getting a lot of complaints, we do really try to work with folks to understand what might be some of the underlying issues. So the intent is not to make people's lives harder that are already hard, but try to find a way to gain compliance. But needing to balance that against treating people similarly so that we're not showing favoritism and we've got due process and we've got that consistency, but also providing resources where it may be useful to help people get over whatever hurdle it is that they have to just not getting rid of that refrigerator that's been sitting out there broken. There's usually something that's getting in the way. So trying to help them get over that, but at a certain point, you gotta get rid of it. So, okay.
It also looks like, if I may, it would be at least 34 days before you got a citation.
That's correct.
So, and sounds like that might cover me.
Oh, that was just,
So with No Mow May in particular, this was kind of an emerging issue. So again, this is one of the things where it's good for codes to change over time. So if there was a policy that said, between this date and this date, we are not enforcing anywhere in the city the grass ordinance. But as of this date, other things will be blooming, and it's time to take the grass down. That's something that the council could choose to do, and that would be preferable to have a policy decision made versus simply.
Dave's walking up behind you.
Yeah, more or less done. Go ahead.
The biggest thing I like to say, I like to think I'm perfect. We all know I'm not. But the biggest thing is when notices go out, it's the communication. Our perception is this. If they explain, well, here's what happened. Here's why I'm going this route. Okay, well, you still got to do a certain level. And I like to think we try to use common sense. It doesn't always happen, but for the most part, it's the communication thing. Once you start talking, I see the point. So it's not just, okay, this is it. I like to think, and it's hard to do that because someone might say, well, he got a break. How come I didn't? But it's the communication, common sense. To try to say, well, if you can just tidy it up a little bit, you got wood pile. It's supposed to be stacked nice, not thrown in a big pot.
So there is a participation and mechanism that the
right.
homeowner
We're not just here to say we want to reach citations. So just so you know that we're pretty good that way.
Part of due process too is city council, and people are regularly in touch with my office saying, this is what happened and I don't agree with it. And then, we review every one of those calls that we receive, so that I think we're adding, the recommendation adds quite a bit of enforceable action and changes some of the proactive nature, but the council's only authorized 0.5 FTE. And you have a growing city of 16,000 people and nearly 7,000 properties, 7,000 households or whatever. And you have due process of so many days before you even reach a citation set. So this is not going to be like a clean sweep through the town and everything gets resolved. And And that, of course, assumes that the council approves all of these things too, which we haven't done any polling yet, so we'll be doing that at the council meeting to see what they say. But the due process is in the process, which I think is laid out pretty well. I wholeheartedly agree with that recommendation. I think it makes it a lot more predictable for people. It'll provide some more consistency among staff. That makes a lot of sense to me, the due process, but it's not quick. I mean, it's not I call and complain about a neighbor and it's resolved in 3 days. There's no way to do that with due process. And again, people have a property right to have general peace and tranquility at their property. And so anytime we are interjecting as government in it, we have to be thoughtful about that.
I'd like to make the motion when the time comes.
Well, there is a motion on the
We
table
have a motion in a second.
Okay, and then,
for all of them, so it's just calling the question if you want.
well, I was going to make an amendment to the off-road, off-street part, backing the RVs making it unlawful to back an RV into your driveway.
Okay.
So, it's not a motion, it's an amendment, is that what I make? Okay. I would like to amend Ordinance 17.80.020, off-street parking requirements. Number 4, I would like to remove the comment or the statement, "It shall be unlawful to back a vehicle into any parking space," or.
Second.
Second, we got a discussion on that. Are we ready to vote on, is there any other questions on any of the other stuff? Wait, so let's vote on the amendment first. First and second on Teresa's amendment. Or, I'm sorry, Teresa. I'm sorry, on Patricia's amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we got a first and second on the original motion, which is the zoning ordinance, text amendments and city code amendments. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We'll move on to.
If I may,
Yep.
I'd just like to thank staff. I know this was this is not the fun part of governing or working for the city. And yeah, it's been a long time since we've had a lot of these things looked at. And as I've been on the council for a while, and this includes some of the stuff that I get the most feedback from constituents on. So I appreciate your efforts.
I would second that, but I don't know if we can vote on it yet. Yeah, all in favor, aye. Yeah.
So we're not gonna have a direct report tonight?
I was gonna give you a chance to ask questions of the report that's submitted, but I did wanna just take a moment to, I guess, reintroduce or formally introduce Assistant City Administrator Jason Stroud. Staff has had the opportunity to review the near crushing caseload of community development, and council has been asking questions for months about, do we have enough help to get things done? The answer is no, and so we're going to make some adjustments. Jason is going to come over and shift some responsibilities to do direct assistance for community development. That's going to allow Director Peterson to focus on 2 primary missions, although that won't be her only focus, but the comprehensive planning process with its various plans, and basically holding SRF accountable, helping with the engagement process to make sure we get that tidied up, and then also the Kinney Corridor Plan, which is heating up a bit. We have quite a bit of opportunity with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Wisconsin DNR providing some grant funding to try to implement the Kinney Corridor Plan. So those are going to be the 2 primary responsibilities of the director for the time being. And Jason will help provide some off-ramp for other work and projects, as well as myself doing that. So You'll be seeing Jason more at Plan Commission meetings, or maybe exclusively, as depending on what Director Peterson has to do. It's not a change in director's role or anything at this point, but it's something for us to just kind of focus on the work that we have to grind through and kind of do a good job for the community on. So, and you might have to see me a little more often every once in a while too, as I try to fill in some of the community development, kind of be a shock absorber or a gap filler for some of the things we've got going. Because as you know, there's lots and lots and lots of projects going on. And that's the public's projects that people see, or what we consider private projects, the investment projects and subdivisions. And we also are managing a huge caseload within community development of infrastructure, city sewers and waters and water towers, and major street projects and bridge replacements. So there's more work than could be accomplished on a quality basis by who we had. So that's, I just wanted to make sure Plan Commission understands there'll be some changes in that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pick up the phone or can't call Amy for any questions you have, but we do want to try to give you some other opportunities as we're kind of working through those projects. So it's an exciting but very busy time.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to say I'm really impressed with the ordinance work that was concurrently put together and delivered to the Planning Commission. I would suggest, however, going through council, maybe it's staggering this so that the public can digest it and not see it all, learn about it all at once. The optics might be better if it's staggered between different meetings so the public can catch up on all of these things. And I realize this probably was planned because you want to have it done concurrently and make these adjustments because they overlap and they're part of the same family of ordinances, but that's just my personal recommendation, something to consider.
And we do have public hearings now. The council added to their public engagement process where now they're doing public hearings at the first and second readings of everything. That doesn't mean that your points aren't valid.
Right.
But it used to be they kind of have the introduction, which may not get much attraction or interest. And then the next meeting or a month from then, it would be, here we go, public hearing,
Right.
Say your piece. And so now there's, public hearings at both of those meetings and a couple of chances. It's going to be challenging to figure out, there's not like RV owners of River Falls Club that we can send and say, hey, just so you know, this might impact you, or then maybe there's probably a Facebook group, but
garage sailors of River Falls.
Yeah, I mean, garage sales would be certainly impact my house and others that I'm aware of. So figuring that out, the political candidates I think are well aware of the changes in case law and all that, and they know what cities are up to. So I don't think that's going to be a big deal. And the residential rental stuff, we don't get the sense, at least from the context we have within the rental world, that there's much pushback. It's hard as a landlord to push against what is essentially the absolute minimum health and welfare standards. I mean, it's not much compared to what they're seeing in other states for sure.
So maybe the fact that we do have the public hearing and on the first reading, because years ago I forgot that's happening, because when I was on council before, didn't have that, and then we had that meeting where we were going to vote is when everybody thought.
But it's the point you make is valid. We're finding that in several cases that there's been a process, there's been agreement by the community, so to speak, or there's been kind of spoken. So then staff is kind of bringing it back to implement, and everybody's like, whoa, where did this come from? So on the court enforcement, I did look quickly. So I'm sorry, I forgot we're on our 5th every other year. So we've done 10 years of data trails. We've been about 55% excellent or good for the first 4 surveys. So the first 8 years. This last one, we were down to 48%. So, I mean, there's a statistical shift in people's, at least their perception or attitude about how well a job we're doing on code enforcement, which is part of the reason that we thought it was important to bring. And it was part of our strategic initiatives too, that the council had said, hey, let's get going a little bit on that. So points are well taken. I appreciate it. Because we have to also see if the council wants to, if they can digest it all at once too, because they got a lot of other stuff coming across their plate too. But thanks for the work. And thanks to staff for doing a lot of work of kind of ferreting through what they thought reflects, the consultant gave us recommendations and then the staff had to say, well, in River Falls, this is probably how it's gonna go down.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, you're adjourned.